Oh, hello, welcome. Thank you for having me. About a month and a half ago, I came here. I was invited to come here by Chelsea to come and speak based on food issues and topics from the Chung collection. And I went down and took a look at the Chung collection like I've been doing for a good number of years. And I took a look around. And I saw a lot of the beautiful artifacts, the beautiful menus, and I needed to do something else. I needed to convey something more than just the menus. And I was telling to Chelsea and a few others before, more than just the Canadian Pacific china and the silverware and things like that, and what it meant. What it meant for me, what it meant for a whole lot of people. So the topic that I was asked, what do you want to speak about this? And the first thing that came to mind for me was food in transit. Because steamships, China, Canada, Canada, China. Very obvious. But over and above, there's something more than just food in transit. So it just dawned on me after coming back here from a number of times in the past month, and also had the pleasure of having Dr. Wallace Chung, come in, and we were comparing menus and different things like that. And the funny thing with Dr. Chung and I, we started talking about different recipes and different foods, and we were getting hungrier and hungrier. Then we ended up having a lunch. So that was the commonality. But coming on from all that is basically, I thought of three different concepts for this talk. The first one is obvious, food in transit, okay? Second one would be people in transit. And the third one would be cultures in transit. Now I'll be talking about all three. And one of the things that I'll be doing is talking about all three. And actually, in the third part, Cultures in Transit, we'll be talking story. I can't think of a better way to convey cultures in transit than by talking story. It's a very important issue. It's a very important aspect in my life. So, food in transit. We take a look at the most profound element that I've known about food in transit was what they call the Columbian Exchange. And that was the 15th and 16th centuries from South America to different parts of the world. I don't know if any one of you knew that chili peppers were brought to India and China by the Portuguese navigators. So if they didn't have the Portuguese navigators, we would not have the spicy Hunan or the Szechuan cuisine. So that's food in transit. The Spanish explorers brought in from South America the potatoes and tomatoes, and they brought that to Europe. They brought the potatoes from South America eventually into Ireland. And it's quite interesting about the migration patterns, and even if we have some of the Spanish cultures, even going down to the south of Ireland to be the Black Irish, as they call them. So we talk about the different type of cultures that come in and the foods that they bring. So food becomes a cultural and commercial commodity. So that's really basically food in transit. The second aspect was people in transit. Now, the immigration patterns emerge and flourish around the Pacific Ocean. The Chinese came to North America, or as we call it, Gamsan Gold Mountain, to become gold miners and railroad workers. First by the schooner ships, and then by the steamer ships, primarily operated by the Canadian Pacific Steamship Company. The service was between Vancouver and Hong Kong, with calls, or I should say Hong Kong, to Vancouver, with calls in Japan and China, later to be in Manila, Philippines, and Honolulu, at that time the territory of Hawaii. This was the fun part for Dr. Chung and myself. We were down there looking at some of the menus, And I know this is not a very clear picture, but this was the 1927 Empress of Canada first class Chinese dinner menu. Now, in this dinner menu, it had cold sliced chicken, stuffed pig's feet, tomato sauce chicken wings, lean pork with sour sauce, bird's nest soup, fried cam in mushroom sauce, scrambled eggs with fresh crab and green peas, boiled terrapin with chicken's feet, fried spring chicken with salt lemon, oriental pickles, fried hang chow fried rice, and hard-boiled eggs and coffee. Really? Really? I mean, this, Dr. Chung and I looked at that and just shook our heads. Totally shook our heads. The next one is the Empress of Asia steerage class Chinese dinner menu. Now, I'm fourth generation, ladies and gentlemen, so I can't understand everything. So thank God Dr. Chung was with me. And he interpreted the menu from the steerage class. And it consisted of sliced meat and egg soup, steamed garupa fish, fried shrimp, stewed chicken wings and tomato sauce, minced chicken with walnuts and almonds, and yung chow fried rice. And we looked at each other and we just thought, oh my God, it would have been steerage for me and for you, okay, at the time. It doesn't matter if it's a comfy stateroom. It was more or less like, okay, we can endure the rigors of steerage, but what are we eating? What are we eating? Okay. Coming back into people in transit, I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal family history. My maternal family came over from southern China in the 1860s and 70s, and they were provisioners in Victoria. They were provisioners for right at the very end of the Fraser River Gold Rush, but they were provisioners for the miners that went up into Cumberland for the coal mines. Okay. My paternal family history, my grandfather came over in 1909 with Dr. Sun Yat-sen. Dr. Sun came over in 1909 prior to the overthrow of the Qing dynasty, and he stayed in Vancouver for an extended period of time to strategize for a fundraising campaign throughout all the different Chinese settlements around North America. Grandfather came over with him, but decided to stay in Vancouver. He had an arranged marriage from my grandmother, from a woman from Victoria, and he had 7 children, of which my father was the eldest. One of the things about grandfather was his family were tea merchants from now pardon my pronunciation, everybody, but Anhui province. Am I saying it right? Thank you so much, Winnie. Okay. From Anhui province, and he was from part of the upper echelon class of people. So he went to university and he spoke about 12 different languages and about 50 different dialects. So he's quite intelligent. And so being educated the way he was, he became more moderate, more liberal. So he aligned himself with Dr. Sun. And at that time, around 1909, I believe that Dr. Sun had to flee China, and they all settled in Yokohama. And then from Yokohama, they came over to Vancouver. My grandfather was an interpreter for the provincial courts. He was what they call the comprador, and that's more like an intermediary between businesses and governments to bring people together. He also brought in a lot of type of food introductions to the family and to the community at large to assist some of the merchants in Vancouver to bring in the Chinese foodstuffs and to facilitate the establishment of some of these food companies. I had 5 other uncles, and it's quite interesting how from their childhood to when they became adults, they always got into the food business. They started at a corner grocery store, and then they worked in a produce wholesale business. And right around that time, in the 1990s, 20s, and 30s, the Vancouver wholesale produce industry was controlled by a number of Jewish families. Case in point, it was one of the mayors, David Oppenheimer, and David Oppenheimer was a food importer into Vancouver, and the David Oppenheimer company still exists. Anyway, my uncles, from being a corner grocery store to working in a produce wholesale with one Jewish family, only later on to acquire the company from the Jewish family, and they started up a produce wholesale business called Pacific Produce. And I must say that the uncles worked it up to where it is now or was. They also set up retail. They had about 30 stores called Produce City, and that was a great deal of the distribution around the Lower Mainland. My father, dear old Mr. Bruce Sung, that's the gentleman on the left, at an early age, when he was 32, he single-handedly, and my father believed in the Rolodex theory. I mean, he was the consummate networker. He managed to cater to the U.S. Army and Navy in Prince Rupert from the point of embarkation for the Pacific Campaign. And from that, he also managed, even at 31, 32, to feed the road gangs for the Alaska Highway. So quite the entrepreneurial individual. And oddly enough, I might add that he didn't become a Canadian citizen until 1949. So I find that really interesting and contrasting. So I'm talking about people in transit, and I'm using my father as an example because from that, his experience in catering to the military, the Alaska Highway, he started catering to different logging and mining camps throughout Western Canada. He acquired a number of hotels and restaurants throughout Western Canada, specifically in Whitehorse, Yukon, and he purchased a property in Whitehorse, Yukon, only to make it Yukon's first supermarket, which was quite fascinating because it was really trading post mentality. So Dad would get his produce, fruits and vegetables from my uncles at Pacific Produce, have it shipped up, and he would get the dairy and meats from Edmonton. So that's who my father was. And it's quite fascinating about the story of the Chinese in Canada, against all odds, it's still at the same time. Against all odds, it's making it on their own, believing in their own devices and believing in their own creativity with a whole lot of confidence. Okay. Where am I now? We're talking about the fresh food source, the fresh uni that we have in British Columbia. Lobster, the fish in Chinese is synonymous with prosperity. Flowering chives, this is part of the fresh produce that we have here in Vancouver. Fruit, kumquat is gold fruit. So the fruit kumquat means gold fruit. So it's always important to have oranges in one's life. Apples. Apples have a quality being red. It's yang, male, representing earth. The color for yang is red, also synonymous with fortune and good luck. And also some of the apples have a little bit of yellow. So it's really interesting to note that the Chinese prefer apples which have 80% red and 20% yellow. I was kind of hungry. I was down in Granville Island. I saw this big tomahawk steak, and I said, I couldn't get away from that. I wish I brought it here and cooked it for all of you. And above all least, that we have the freshest of ingredients here in British Columbia in terms of our exclusive gooey duck. And what's really interesting here is that when I was a kid, I would go down to Boundary Bay and go clam digging for pennies, having gooey duck, only to realize many years later it's an expensive commodity in Asia. I believe about $120 a pound. I stand corrected on that. Now, that person on the left is not a lizard or gecko. That person on the left is me. And currently I have a business, it's a tour business, and one of my tours that I do is a walking tour of Chinatown. And my mission and purpose is to educate and entertain from a culinary and cultural approach. Once again, this is more or less like cultures in transit. Normally, quite a bit, I have a lot of culinary students from the different culinary schools that come into Vancouver. In this case here, we have people from Taiwan, Nigeria, Brazil, Colombia, Port Moody. And they come here to learn about the culinary techniques, the traditional culinary techniques, but they also come here for the freshness of ingredients. I hope you all realize, I hope you all are proud to be in British Columbia to eat all the good food that we have here. I am co-president of the Chinese Canadian Historical Society. And with the Chinese Canadian Historical Society, our mission statement is pertaining to educational and community outreach. It's really important to maintain and to perpetuate the Canadian Chinese history that we have. Part of Chinese Canadian Historical Society's mandate is we had something called Eating Stories. We had a workshop called Eating Stories. It was in the years 2005. We had a group of society members come in and do learning how to write using food and family as a medium. There's a number of you who are out there. I see Alan. I even see Dr. Yu out there. You did a good job, Dr. Yu, by the way. Okay. And part of the Cultures in Transit is actually speaking about some of the stories of some of the members that have written some books, some stories. Now what we have here, I got 3 stories. One is by Mr. Larry Wong. Now Larry is a friend of the university, and he has a book out there called Dim Sum Stories, and it's a fascinating read about his life, his upbringing in Chinatown. I'm just going to get you Larry's story right now. Here we go. Larry's story is entitled, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? 1952. Pop hummed as he made 2 swift chops with his cleaver to half the chicken. In the mixing bowl, he poured soy sauce followed by a sprinkle of pepper and salt before marinating the chicken. What are you making, Pop? What, Guy? Wow, pot roast chicken. Chicken first browned, then cooked on medium heat with Chinese mushrooms, wine, and garlic. Like the Chinese of his generation, whenever there were guests, Pop always made a chicken dish. He must have had dozens of recipes for chicken in his head. He could make boiled chicken, breaded chicken, braised chicken, fried chicken, anything and everything chicken. All he had in our tiny kitchen were 2 hot plates and 2 elements each and a wood stove. Our guest that day was Gary, my brother-in-law, my new brother-in-law, whom Pop and I never met. Jenny, his sister, left home in 1948 when she was 17. She wanted to see the world beyond Chinatown. Chinatown was an insular village back then. Everyone knew one another and was happy to stay, but some of the younger generation wanted to go beyond Pender Street. My older brother Wah left home to go to the University of Washington, but never returned except for an occasional visit. And now Jenny was returning home, if only for just a little while. Jenny always missed Mom. Mom died when Jenny was 9, leaving her with Pop, 2 older brothers, and me, the baby of the family. It was a lot for Jenny to grow into her teens in such a male-dominated family. As much as Pop tried, it was a challenge to be both mother and father. Shortly after Mom's death, my eldest brother, Git, died at the age of 20 from tuberculosis, a disease common in the time of Chinatown. At the time in Chinatown. The day after Jenny left home, Pop ranted and raved for hours. His voice bounced off the 4 walls with rage. He usually had a bad temper, but that day he outdid himself. He disowned his daughter and told all his friends about it. Every time he spoke about it, the veins on his neck and forehead visibly pulsed. At first, when Jenny left, I missed my siblings. I quickly realized that Pop had changed his attitude towards me. He was more attentive. I complained one day while playing Cowboys and Indians that I didn't have a bolster for my cap gun. I can't see Larry with a bolster. The next day he made a gun belt and holster out of some leatherette material. He also measured me and made my shirts. In the time spent with my father, I learned that he and my mother were in Chinese opera. Before the revolution of 1911, the women were forbidden from the stage so men can play the female roles. When China became a republic, the men-only tradition was lifted, and Mom, who by then was in her 20s, eagerly tried out for Chinese opera and was accepted. With the local Chinese opera troupe, my parents were active on stage, but in reverse gender roles. My mother played a general, my father a fair maiden. Oh, that's pretty current these days. Okay. There were times at night when I can hear Pop singing in bed. I ignored it, but later on I found out his songs were love songs from the Chinese opera. I think he sang them to remember my mother and keep memories of her alive. The first few years of Jenny being gone, she wrote me regularly from a town in northern Ontario. With each letter, she included a list of Chinese groceries for me to buy for her. She included a check. It was more than enough, as I always had leftover change. The list included bottles of soy sauce, pounds of Chinese mushrooms and sausages, bags of dried farke noodles, tins of abalone, canned vegetables, and even smelly salted fish. I shipped off the care package. I thought nothing of it other than she missed Chinese food. And obviously in a small mining town, Chinese groceries barely existed. Her letters and lists were also a way of keeping in touch with us, even if Pop had disowned her. When Jenny announced in 1950 that she got married, and worse yet, for my father, to a white person, Pop immediately jumped up and down and disowned her again. He was furious. How dare his daughter married outside of our race? What was she thinking? Unacceptable. His voice rose and stayed on an anger level all week long. Now, 2 years later, she was returning home. Pop calmed down, though occasionally he gnashed his teeth at the mention of her name. Now he hummed as he moved about in the kitchen. He was steaming pork pie or a jiokbang with a duck egg yolk. The pickled Swiss chard with beef was already cooked in the frying pan, and the steamed salted fish was also ready. The air filled with the smell of garlic and ginger. Just then, the front door opened, and in walked Jenny with her husband. "Pop! Pop! I missed you!" Tears ran down her face. In a very stoic way, the father said, Moham, don't cry, no need to cry." He stepped forward, his eyes happy to see his daughter. But when he shifted to the tall, blonde man, his new son-in-law Gary, he sighed. His body sagged, but he extended his hand. His eyes were wet. Jenny raised her arms up to give Pop a hug, but he stood still with his arms at his sides. He hugged him awkwardly. Sikchan were the only words that he could say. Let's eat. We all sat around the dinner table. Jenny laughed when he saw the newspaper tablecloth. Gary sat next to Pop and I next to Jenny. I can still read the comics upside down, she said. I laughed and smiled at Gary. Pop had already set the food on the table. Oh wow, said Jenny, my favorites. Mine too, I thought. But what about poor Gary? I couldn't imagine that any of this village food would appeal to a white person. What do you do for a living? Pop asked Gary. I'm a butcher. A butcher, said Pop, his eyes widening. That's good. People have to eat, so you'll never be out of a job. He offered Gary some Johnny Walker, and they toasted to the occasion. I have a job waiting for me here, so we'll be staying in Vancouver, Gary told Pop. Pop nodded and pointed out to the food on the table to eat. And from that, people in transit, from Jenny going over to Ontario, meeting a Caucasian man, and then getting into helping that gentleman integrate into the way of the Chinese cuisine. So it's a very people in transit. Another story in transit would be Jackie Lee Son. And Jackie originated from, I believe, in Durban or Johannesburg, South Africa. Now this is a small little story called Chow Mein Comfort. It's about her father's handyman. Jack Mamensing first came to work with our family when he helped Dad wash the car. Dad asked him to come back and help with other chores around the house and the shop. He worked with Aya, and then with Dad, and then my brother until he retired in 2004 after 51 years with the family. He is very proud he knows the entire family, even those who left South Africa many years ago. Jack helped Ama in her corner store. He bottled the vinegar and the paraffin used as fuel in the kerosene lamps and prepared the funnel-shaped sugar packets. He loved Ama's cooking. He especially loved Ama's chow mein. It was one of his favorite meals, one of his comfort foods associated with the family, which he also became his family. When a devastating storm wreaked havoc on many of the homes in our town, much of Jack's homes were ruined. Aya told Jack to go to the shop and take some groceries home. Jack remembers Aya's final hours. He went to the hospital to visit Aya, and when the hospital staff asked him what he was doing there, he said, "I'm here to visit my father." At that time, hospitals were racially segregated, but Dad asked the staff to let Jack in and spend some time with Aya. Jack said he knew Aya, could hear him speak. He knew when Aya was close to dying. Jack was so proud to make the speech at Aya's funeral. He told me all it came from the heart. So, culture in transit. We have someone totally independent becoming part of the family. The final story is from me. You're going to like it. Now, this is also food in transit or culture in transit. It's about diversity, it's humorous, it's profane, but I'm going to read it to you anyway. Okay. A lesson in communication. It's June of 1970. I'm starting my very first romantic relationship with a pretty girl named Mary. Love is in the air, so how do I celebrate? A special dinner at Foo's in Chinatown consisting of all my favorite dishes. Careful planning is in the order. First, I must prepare a list of all my favorites. Chicken chow mein, garlic fried crab, gailan with oyster sauce. I'm getting very hungry while making this list, but I'm also looking forward to this great dinner date. Second, because I don't speak a word of Cantonese, it's important I learn how to order my favorite dishes. After all, I want this evening to be totally authentic, to be a totally authentic one to really impress Mary, who is Caucasian. All week and for 1 hour each day, Mom and Dad have been drilling in me how to pronunciate the correct tones. I'm retaining it all very well. Man, am I going to impress Mary or what? Saturday finally arrives. I'm looking so cool. Now this is a period piece, everybody, so just bear with me here. I am looking so cool in my tan bell bottoms, tan elevated shoes, indigo long collared shirt, and rose tinted wire glasses. I pick Mary up and she's really looking hot in her red mini skirt, white knee-high leather boots, and a frilly white blouse. When we get to Foos, the place is extremely busy and teeming with lots of people. The clicking of chopsticks, lively conversation, and awesome aromas coming from the food. Getting to our table, I start to lose my nerve and break out in a cold sweat. After all, how can I fake speaking Cantonese in front of all these Cantonese people and in front of Mary? Nothing left but to go for broke. I signal the waiter by raising my hand, "Four guy, four guy, four guy." The waiter comes around laughing, as are some people on the other tables. He explains to me in English that the term for waiter is four gay, and that four guy means turkey. The waiter is having a field day at my expense. And now Mary's starting to laugh and I'm starting to cringe under the table in total embarrassment. In spite of it all, I proceed to order our dinner. The first item is chicken chow mein or gaisi chow mein, and the second item is garlic fried crab or sunji chow hai. Laughter erupts. Instead of the items I thought I requested, I really ordered chicken shit with noodles and garlic fried shoes. My incorrect tones totally changed the meaning. The waiter exclaims his clipped English, "You funny, you born here." Feeling totally defensive and wounded, I told Mary to stop laughing. It's not that funny. I finished ordering the dinner in English. I wanted to ensure that we are going to have all of my favorite dishes. The food arrives and the smells, taste, and colors of dinner eradicate the awkward moment. The chicken chow mein is pan-fried with oyster sauce infused julienne, strips of chicken, and donggu mushroom. The fragrant garlic fried crab is done with a spicy salt to retain the moisture in the meat. The more she savors the food, the more Mary becomes impressed. Food saves the day. Although an embarrassing moment, this Saturday night is an invaluable lesson for me. Through all my assorted faux pas, I managed to put a smile on people's faces and develop a lifelong thirst and hunger to learn more about my heritage. On this Saturday night, the waiter is my teacher and I appreciate him correcting me. I'm willing to learn and experience life and to let others help show me the way. Ayah, what amazing powers food has in nourishing the body and soul and in connecting with others. As for Mary, well, that's another story. So that's another example of food culture in transit. Diversity, multiculturalism, it's really important. So today in my talk, I really, coming from the Wallace Chung collection, I've extracted food in transit, people in transit, culture in transit. Thank you.